Well, hey everyone, and welcome to episode number 2 of the Other Six podcast. My name is Chad Boak. I'm the creative pastor here at Vaughn Forest Church. Joining me, as always, my fearless co-host, Matt Collins, our worship pastor.
Guys.
Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing dandy.
Yeah, dandy.
Dandy.
That's excellent. And then obviously we are also joined today with our special guest, our lead pastor, Adam Bishop, and his wife, Morgan Bishop. How are you guys today?
This is the part we're supposed to kiss each other, right?
I mean, it is a marriage.
We are
talk,
talking
so.
about marriage today. That's
Okay.
right.
I thought I'd give it
that's
a
fine.
shot.
Yeah, for sure. But we are talking about marriage. A couple of things before we jump into today's podcast. We had a great response last week to this podcast. So many folks text, emailed, commented how much they're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And so we just want to say thank you. Thank you for
Thank you guys.
in. Yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this discussion. And we want this to be helpful. And so
We do want it to be helpful.
It seems like it was. And so we're excited
That is
about
our goal.
That is the goal.
Helpful.
That's right. That's right. And I actually had someone reach out to me and they said, hey, if we have any questions, can we send those in? And I said, you know what? That's a great idea. And so we've created an email address, and it is theother6@vaughnforest.com. So if you have questions, email them to theother6@vaughnforest.com. And if we like your question, we will read it on the air and hopefully answer that question. So
Can it be anything?
Does that come to my inbox? Like, where's
Yeah,
that
where
going?
does it go?
Yeah.
Can it be anything?
One of our
Matt?
other 6 pastors. That's
That's
where
right.
it's going to go.
Exactly.
The
Okay.
other 6 pastors.
Exactly. But yeah, if any of our listeners, viewers have any questions, email theother6@vaughnforest.com.
Very mysterious.
That's right. Yeah. You know what? If nothing else, it should be really fun to see the kind of questions we get. So anyway, last week...
We'll be sure to share your contact info on the podcast
right.
if you send in a
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
That's right.
Just kidding. We will keep them anonymous.
This question
right?
came
Okay.
from...
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, we're not... Yes, especially if it is a sensitive question, we will obviously not share your name, and we will keep that anonymous. But, we're in this series, Functionally Dysfunctional, and last week was all about parenting. We talked a lot about parenting, and this week was all about marriage.
So I wanted to know where did the idea come from to do an interview with the two of you? Like that was a really, really cool thing that we did Sunday, and we don't really get to see a lot of that. So what kind of spurred that idea?
So, man, we've been married, obviously. We talked about this a few times yesterday, 18 years. So I would guess probably about a decade ago, we were serving, at another church. I was on staff there, and just talking with the other pastors and pastors' wives, it kind of came up, and we were encouraged, don't ever hold back from sharing, part of your story. It could really encourage other couples. And so we kind of started doing that in our life groups, usually, and just with friends. And then 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, we were serving at Bethlehem Church, and where you guys are familiar with. And we did that on a Sunday there for the first time. And I was just on staff there at the time. And it's funny because we found those notes this past week, and
Were they different?
Oh my gosh.
Completely different, yeah.
It was like a lifetime ago.
Yeah. A couple kids ago.
kids ago.
So
Yeah.
it's totally
Perspective
different
change.
season of life. We talked about totally different things.
Right.
Yeah.
But with the same goal of being open about the struggle for the
Yeah.
first 3 years to hopefully provide some encouragement and hope. And so that was well received. But sometimes you do something once and it's like, okay, cool. That's what the Lord wanted to do in that season and in that moment and with those people. And then you, so it's not like we were doing that and going, well, we're going to do this from now on. But as I really began to pray and prepare for this series, and we probably, I don't know, about Easter is when we locked in, all right, we're going to do this series.
Right.
I really began to pray, Lord, what do you have in mind for this series? And I felt like in my just kind of own devotion time with the Lord, he led me to, what if you guys could share that here at Vaughn Forest? And obviously then talked to the boss to see what she thought. And
Approved.
And really grateful that she was, willing to do that.
Yeah.
And so, when we all have our story.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge with that is to not share our story and make it all about us. You share a story to hopefully help someone else.
Yeah.
And so our goal yesterday was just to hopefully be helpful. If someone can learn from some of the mistakes that we made, and it helps them, then I'm not saying it makes that season worth it. But what I am saying is you can see how the Lord is still using that in people's lives. And so I really am grateful for Morgan's willingness to be vulnerable and open and honest with people. And so, yeah, it was just one of those things that we started doing years ago. And if the Lord gives us an opportunity and it can help somebody, then we want to do it.
Well, I think too, practically speaking, we don't want to get up and teach because we are not experts and we do a lot of things wrong. But I think for me, wanting to do it to help women in our church, just maybe take a deep breath and be like, you know what? It's okay to talk about these hard things. It's okay to admit, I don't really know how to do this.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get somebody to help me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's healthy to talk about the hard things and to even get a professional to step in and teach you some things and how to communicate better if that's your thing or you know, it's our thing, but so
I think there's always this narrative that if you need help in Christian circles, you must be weak. You must not be walking with the Lord the right way.
Right.
Anything we can do to help shift that narrative, the strongest thing you can ever do is ask for help.
Right.
Maybe somebody's listening today. It's not their marriage. Maybe it's a different issue in their life.
Yeah.
And they just need help.
Right.
And you're giving people permission to say it's okay to ask for help.
Y'all mentioned yesterday y'all were part of our life group. They kind of helped you with insight through that season. And then you mentioned getting professional help. What are some warning signs? And you said that a lot of people struggle with admitting that they need help. And I believe that 100%. I see it all the time. So what are some warning signs to look for that maybe I can't do that on my own? We actually really do need help, and we're not going to be able to solve this together.
Yeah, how do you know when it's time to seek that out?
I think that you have to pay attention to patterns.
Okay.
You have a big blow up, a big fight. Can you resolve it? Can you keep moving on? That's going to happen sometimes.
Yeah.
It's when it's happening frequently, when there's a pattern to it, when it's more than once, when it's not an isolated incident, when it kind of starts to feel like the norm, and there's some discontentment with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Then it's probably time to do something about it.
Okay.
And so I would say, nobody is doing everything perfectly, but you want to pay attention to patterns. And sometimes if you apply that thinking to other areas of your life, it makes a little bit more sense. So, we have a lovely little dog named Evergreen. And, if Evergreen throws up in her crate, it's like, oh boy, who's cleaning that up? Me. But, if it's an isolated incident, we're not worried about it. But if Evergreen's doing that every single day, we're probably going to take her to the vet.
Yeah.
So we understand how to do that in other areas of our life. So just pay attention to that when it comes to your marriage.
I would say, I tell friends this often, why would you settle for a mediocre marriage?
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm a huge proponent of counseling, even just personally, not even marriage counseling, because, life is hard. We all go through really tough situations, and it doesn't have to be we're in a really tough spot in our marriage and we need counseling.
Yeah.
It could be like something little in your life that you just don't know how to mentally process or mentally handle. Like, there's people you can pay that know how to ask the right questions that can, send you in the right direction.
Right.
That can just really help.
I think that's a great point, Morgan. One of the things we've talked about, especially in this COVID season, is COVID has been kind of a magnifier in a lot of ways. And we've talked about the health pandemic, but also there's that mental health pandemic. And so, seeking that counseling, I think, has become a little more normative. But I love the encouragement to, hey, don't wait. Don't hesitate. Go seek that out. And I love this idea of like, why would you settle for a mediocre marriage when it could be so much more?
Yeah.
So anyway, yesterday we talked a little bit about the foxes in marriage, and I really like this idea.
I love that.
Of foxes in marriage, and I have to say, when you said there's a scripture. And it comes from Song of Solomon. I saw some eyebrows raised in the congregation from the stage. Like, where's he going with this? We're not 100% sure. But we talked about that scripture that talks about these foxes that come and attack the garden of your marriage. And you guys mentioned that communication was your big fox. And some things that you guys did to kind of combat that. Well, my question for you is, what are those other foxes? And what are some ways that folks can fend those foxes off?
So the other three we named yesterday, and I'm sure there's more, but these are like most common ones.
Right.
You've got faith, family, and finances. They all start with F. So there you go. We couldn't think of one for communication that started with an F. But I think, Chad, family is the one that I see destroying a lot of marriages.
Right.
So we probably should unpack that here for a few minutes. When we say family, it's obviously how you go about doing family, but we spent some time talking about parenting last week. So for the purposes of our discussion today, I think talking about the extended family, the in-laws,
Right.
the we're married now, what role do our parents still have in our lives? What say do they have in our lives? Then kids come along. What is the dynamic there with grandparents, and how are we supposed to decide where we're going to spend holidays? And those can seem like some pretty light subjects to discuss, but for some couples, like that is the fox that's destroying their marriage.
Right.
And I'm not trying to stereotype, but we've lived in New York City, we lived in Denver, we both born and raised in suburban Atlanta, and we're back in the South here in Montgomery Pike Road. For whatever reason, I think that the fox of family prowls the greatest in the South. I don't know why that is, but it doesn't seem to be as big of an issue in the other parts of the country we've lived in.
Interesting.
But there's something about life in the South and those strong familial, if I said that correctly, ties
Right.
Yeah.
that still cling
Traditions.
to you when you get into marriage. And we have had couples tell us just terrible stories.
Wow.
One couple, they were complaining to us one time over dinner about how they had to go to one of their parents' house for Christmas again this year, and they had their own kids. They wanted to do Christmas at their own house. And to me, this seems like a real simple one, right? I'm like,
Right.
well, just pick up the phone or text them and tell them you won't be making it this year. Like, you're going to have Christmas at your own
Granny's
house.
gonna come after
And
you.
simultaneously, they looked at us like, oh, no, we could never do that.
Wow.
And I was like, no, I can show you how to work a phone. I promise you can do it.
That's
They're
right.
like, no,
Yeah.
we could never do that. And this was really creating a problem in their marriage. And I said, okay, well, you guys both hate going. You want to do Christmas with your own kids, but you're telling me you're still going. You got to help me with this. I don't understand this box. This box doesn't make sense to me, right?
Right.
So I'm like, well, how do you guys get through it? Do you know what they told me? They said, we just drink a lot. So
Which that's not funny. That's
their
that's
solution was, we drink a lot every Christmas in front of our kids because we just hate being there
my
so much.
goodness.
Yeah.
What is now functionally dysfunctional?
terrible. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You're there.
So that's an
Yeah, you are
extreme
there.
example, but you've got to create some healthy boundaries,
Right.
and then you've got to communicate those boundaries in a loving way. So we're not advocating treating your parents terribly. They're your parents. You honor them.
Right.
But you can still communicate boundaries. And I think that's something that we worked on early in our marriage. It hasn't really been a fox, but there's still some times we have to clarify those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that, for Adam and I, we just decided we're going to make the best decision. It usually comes around at holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, all those. We're going to make the best decision for our family. Once you're married, once you have kids, that's your immediate family. Your
Right.
in-laws, your cousins, your aunts,
Yeah.
they're
Extended family.
They're extended family. And so, for us, we've had to say no sometimes because we're not willing to sacrifice our relationship for.
Trying to appease someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you communicate it in a loving way, most of the time, everybody will be fine.
Sure.
They're
Yeah.
gonna make it.
Right.
I remember a few years ago, we had already decided we were gonna spend that Thanksgiving with Morgan's family because for whatever reason, the previous couple Thanksgivings we had ended up with my family, and we're really blessed that both of our parents are super understanding and super kind, super gracious. I know not everybody has that, but we'd already decided that. And then kind of last minute in October, my grandmother decided she wanted to have everybody at her house for Thanksgiving. And this was a really big deal because it hadn't happened in years. And so she, sends out the email, calls everybody, and everyone's like, oh, well, yeah, we're definitely there. And so, I realized, okay, well, what are we going to do here? But because we had already laid that foundation and we had lovingly communicated over the years, it was a very easy phone call for me to make to my grandmother and just say, I'm really sorry, we're not going to be able to make it.
Right.
Yeah.
And she was fine with that. And she responded with love. But the principle there was I was not going to go to Morgan and go, hey, I need for you to call your parents and change the plans because
Right.
my grandmother just...
Yeah.
So what Morgan said there is we're making the decision that's best for us, we had already communicated some things. Even though someone else changed their plans, that doesn't mean we have to change ours. But we weren't mean-spirited about it.
Right.
We were loving. And then the other foxes, finances. Typically in a marriage, there's one person who is really good at managing those details. So figure out who that person is. When we first got married, Morgan managed the details of our finances. And a few years in, she was just like, could you do this? Like, this is not a life-giving exercise for me, So I've managed the details of that. But we communicate not daily, but we certainly communicate weekly.
Right.
We sit down, we look at it together, we talk about it together, we pray about it together. Yeah. We're on the same page with it. So couples, we have separate checking accounts. It's the couple that, he's the spender and she's the saver, or she's the spender and he's the saver, and they can't get on the same page with finances. That can really create a problem. And it is the number one issue that married couples fight about.
Right.
It's one of the reasons we don't shy away from talking about money at Vaughn Forest Church. Jesus talked about money more than heaven and hell combined.
Right.
So, I think you could also throw prayer in there as well. So we talk about money a lot for just the pragmatic, things in life. But for a lot of married couples, when you bring up money, you can basically say, you've tried it your way. Do you want to try it God's way now?
Yeah.
See how it works for you. And we offer groups that kind of help people with that. So, if you have a reoccurring challenge in your marriage that you can't really seem to make any progress through with, that's probably your fox. It's okay. Doesn't mean your marriage is going to end, but what it means is you might want to start figuring out some steps you could take to combat that. And that was hopefully the point that people heard yesterday when we were talking about it.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah. So you talked about prioritizing family, and then in the interview, not sermon, but interview, you talked about prioritizing each other. So Morgan, how do you prioritize Adam?
So what was the book we read years ago?
The Love
Five
Languages, yeah.
Love
So
language.
that's been really big in our marriage because I want to love Adam the way that he receives, what's the word? Receives it.
Yeah, I feel love. Yeah,
So
right.
we have different love languages. So I've had to learn and work really hard over the years to speak his love language because it doesn't come naturally to me because mine's completely different. And so I'm a person of less words than my sweet husband who likes to talk a lot. But his
She said
love,
that.
Creature that likes to
No.
talk.
She was
Come
so
on.
nice about how you said that. Yeah, thank you, babe. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
that.
So his love language is words of affirmation. I'm a quiet, introverted person, and so it doesn't come naturally to me. So I've had to work really hard over the years to make sure he feels loved that way.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So,
Yeah, so verbally, point out what I'm doing well.
You
I'm
did
very
awesome.
I'm very needy, Matt. I need someone to tell me, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, people like
Adam,
you.
you're smart enough.
Adam,
man.
that's a great point.
So, thank you guys. You see, I get lots of
his
affirmation
love
at
tank
work.
is
Yeah, yeah.
full.
Full
Thank
for the
you,
whole
guys.
week.
Morgan's
Yeah.
love language is quality time. That's not my love language.
Okay.
So I'm a very driven, ambitious, goal-oriented, get-it-done person.
Type A.
Yeah. Pray for our pastors as you listen to Vaughn Forest. I'm such a difficult guy to work with, right? So, for me, get up, get going, tackle the day. If Morgan says, I love you, you're amazing in the morning, and tells me I love you, you're amazing at night, I'm good. I'm fine, right?
Hey.
I got a lot of stuff I need to get done. And I would work all day, every day.
Yeah.
Work is not something that I can't wait till work's done so I can go do
Yeah.
what I want to do. I love working. I love doing what I get to do. So what I had to figure out in marriage early on was how to self-impose some boundaries on my work so that I freed up my time for her. So work doesn't come home with me. Work stays at work.
Yeah.
I'd never look at email at home.
Wow.
When we sit down to eat dinner, the phone does not go to the dinner table. When we're in the living room hanging out, the phone's in a different room. And it's not because I don't want to be doing that stuff. It's because when I'm doing that stuff, what I'm communicating to her is that you don't matter. And Morgan's not a needy woman by any stretch of the imagination. Her love language is just quality time.
Yeah.
So I've got to make sure that the time I'm with her, I'm not just physically present. I'm emotionally present. I'm mentally present, and I can tell you that I'm grateful that we tried to start building these rhythms early in our marriage before we had kids, because we were married for almost 7 years before we had Sam. Once kids came into the picture, those habits had already been put in place. And so that has served me well as a dad.
Yeah.
You know, my boys, you know, one of my rules is like, you never walk in the house on the phone, ever. So, you know, drive around, take the long way home, sit in the driveway if you need to. But when you walk in the home, you're there, you're present. And so, you know, work has always been able to stay at work. But then because of that boundary, what's happened over the years and what would happen in any career is there are days where work is going to invade your home.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus said, if it's the Sabbath and the sheep get out of the pen, go get the sheep.
Right.
Put them back in the pen. So I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
People's lives don't operate by my schedule. So if I'm at home and one of our members gets rushed to the hospital or something happens, and I've got to go pastor and love on somebody, that's what I'm going to do. Right. And Morgan's going to be encouraging me to go because she knows I'm not the guy that does that all the time.
Right.
So when exceptions come up, they are exceptions, and it's easy to spot. And I would encourage, you know, anybody, if you're facing that tension between work and home and marriage and how do you manage all that, you know, figure it out. You know, figure it out. There are some days, we had one of these days a few weeks ago. Like, I don't do this often, but there was just a day I realized that night when I was getting ready to go to sleep, like, you still got a lot to do this week. So I set my alarm clock for like 4 o'clock and I got up and I worked for like 2.5 hours before anybody else in my house was awake. Wow. And I got it done so that then, you see what I'm saying? So that's the very long way of trying to get to, if you know their love language, then you can begin to adjust. Morgan, quiet, introverted. So she's had to learn how to speak up more. Me, driven, motivated, time, you know, I got stuff I need to do. Well, put some boundaries there.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's what's happened. We've both benefited from that.
Yeah.
So the Lord brought us together, and I am a much more balanced person for having married someone who's made me aware of that. And Morgan, I think you would say that that's benefited you in other relationships as well.
I'm a better friend because I'm a better encourager. I'm a better encourager to my kids because I see the benefit that is, you know, given to Adam just with my, you know, speaking up more.
And so those other love languages are acts of service, giving gifts, and physical touch. So, you know, read the book, or I'm sure there's a YouTube video you could watch and save yourself some time.
Someone reading it.
You know, learn your spouse's love language and then try to love them the way they feel loved.
You know, Adam, yesterday during the message, you said something that I've never heard before, but I really liked, and I've heard a couple of folks since then mention it. And you said that you can have a different marriage with the same spouse. And I think that's a very interesting idea. And I have a couple of questions about that. One, what is that process like? And then two, what would you guys say to someone who is in a marriage right now, they can't even fathom having a different marriage with the same spouse, whether it's bitterness, whether it's just hopelessness, whether it's just routine, everything seems the same over and over again. What would you say to that person, and how would you even begin to build that different marriage to that same spouse?
The first thing I would say is you got to have both people committed to that. So despite the fact that we were in a tough spot, neither one of us were willing to quit on our marriage. But if one of us had said, I'm not willing to give this a shot, our marriage wouldn't have made it. So you got to have two people willing to work on it. That's the first place I would start. And then I would just say, and we've been, you know, talking about this a lot since the message yesterday as well, so I appreciate you bringing this up. Because what we focused, and feel free to jump in here anytime, I don't want to do all the talking. What we focused on yesterday in the message was our role in loving one another and not trying to be the Holy Spirit in each other's lives where we try to change each other.
Right.
Okay? But, here's a big but, right? There are changes that need to happen. So part of what we were trying to say yesterday is you need to know your role, love your spouse unconditionally. But listen, there's a lot of spouses listening to this podcast right now. You're just a jerk. You are a jerk. You treat your spouse like dirt. You speak with harsh words. You have terrible habits. And it's really hurting another person. And you're so much of a jerk that you don't even care.
Wow.
That needs to change. So what we're not doing yesterday is giving license to continue to just be a jerk. what we were trying to help couples see is your role is to love them unconditionally. Now, get your butt into counseling and figure out what you need to change. So when we went to marriage counseling, most of what was happening in those sessions is Morgan is pointing out to the counselor things about me that are driving her crazy that she's continued to bring up. And I'm so stubborn, I'm not going to change it because it's not your role to change me.
Right.
Leave me alone.
Right.
And the counselor looking at me and going, what's wrong with you? This is a beautiful woman who loves you and wants to be married to you, and she's pointing out things about you she doesn't like, and you're unwilling to change them. You need to explain why. Yeah. And I'm like, what's your problem?
Right.
Can we get the next marriage counselor that's available today? Like, I didn't like this. It's like, whoa, you're siding with her. But what he's trying to help me see is like, everything she just pointed out about you needs to change. Now, here's my defense, Chad. That's who I am. Mm-hmm. So here's the mistake I had made. I had taken behaviors and I had synced them up with my identity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So what the counselor's doing is going, that's not who you are. Okay, first of all, child of God. Second of all, aren't you a pastor? Don't you teach people about identity in Christ? Okay, so let's talk about that. Third of all, everything else about your life is a behavior you've picked up away. We are the sum total of our habits. So you have some bad habits that have formed some bad behaviors. It takes 90 days to make a habit, 90 days to break a habit. Here's some new behaviors for you to do to change these habits. When we come back here next week, I'm going to ask her how you've been doing. Oh, man. Is it my turn now? He's like, okay, now it's your turn. So then I say, all right, here's all the things about Morgan. And he looks at Morgan and he goes, I don't understand you. You have this amazingly handsome husband sitting here beside you who loves you dearly, and he's pointing out things about you that he doesn't like, and like you're not. And Morgan's like, wait a second.
That's who I am.
Yeah.
Where's the next counselor?
Right.
So Morgan's got her behaviors synced up with her identity, and what does he do? Nope, you're gonna start doing this differently. You're gonna start doing this differently, and we're gonna come back here next week, and I'm gonna ask him how you've been doing. And we had to act our way, behave our way into a new marriage.
Wow.
It's the same principle, Chad, as if I recognized I need to get in better shape. And I went to meet with a physical trainer, is that what they're called?
Trainer.
Yeah, trainer. And they said, all right, here's what you got to do daily. Here's what you got to eat daily. Pay me a lot of money and come back next week and let's see how you're doing. And if I do those things, I'll probably get healthier. Same idea with marriage. And the value of the counselor is the diagnosis, okay? I wasn't wise enough to recognize the behavior identity sync up that was happening. But then B, the prescription. Here's the things to do differently to change those behaviors.
Right.
And as we both worked on them simultaneously over a very long period of time, things started to look different. So when we say you can have a different marriage with the same spouse, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of work as if someone said, I'd kind of let my health go, and it took me about 6 to 9 months to get back to a healthy place.
Right.
It was the same thing for us. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think as I'm listening to you talk, I don't know, I think men and women deal with this, but isn't it interesting how we can treat the person we love the most the worst?
Yeah.
Because we're so comfortable with each other.
Right.
We let our guard down. We don't even think about how we talk to them. And, as you're talking, I'm like, well, yes, we had to do a lot of things. We're not terrible people, but we were just coming at each other in a way that wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
And I think, there's a lot of people, and maybe it's just us. We have very type A personalities. And so maybe it's just us. Maybe other personalities, that doesn't really happen with them. But for us, yes, we had to really work on just treating each other nicer. I know that sounds super simple.
Right.
But I think we were so comfortable with each other. And the big thing for us that I think we've taken along, the years is somebody told us years ago, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And we've really come back to that a lot because of the way our personalities are, the type A, we both want to be right. Make no mistake about it. If we have our mind set on something and we're arguing about it, we both think we're right, And so we're going to argue that point until the cows come home.
And we had a marriage counselor look at us one time and say, you're both right. And that was really frustrating for me. You know?
How?
And he helped us process that.
Yeah.
Now, if you go to the foxes that we talked about earlier, you know, sometimes I meet with married couples and try to just encourage them, pray for them as their pastor. I always want to let them know I'm available, but then I usually try to make the handoff to a professional licensed Christian counselor because we've benefited from that so much, and I don't want to step outside of my area of expertise, right? But if you take that, someone's listening, communication isn't their thing. Maybe it's finances. So what would that look like? Well, you don't get to make a purchase on Amazon for the next 7 days. That would be changing a behavior, okay? If it's family, you don't get to make a decision with your mom on the phone anymore until you run it past your husband. That's a behavior. You know, it's faith. Every night for the next 7 nights, you're going to do a family devotion with your entire family. That's behavior. So once you can identify the fox, there usually are some behaviors that if you start incorporating pretty quickly, you can begin to shift the culture of how things go. Yeah. And then the other thing that I always tell married couples is you've got to be very gracious with one another while you attempt to incorporate new behaviors. It's not like you leave the counseling session and go home and immediately start doing this stuff. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So it does take some time to get these new habits formed. But we formed some new habits, and thankfully now, all these years later, those new habits drive our conflict management. We have, as recently as this morning, we were arguing about something because of our personalities. You know, we argue and we have conflict, but it didn't create any problems.
Right.
We just disagreed with something over the phone, and we're fine. And people go, well, how are you fine? Well, it's because of the way we handle it. You know, we're not interested in being right anymore. We're more interested in being connected with one another. But that doesn't mean that I just always agree with Morgan or that she always agrees with me. We just handle that conflict differently now.
So you talked about having your people. Why is having, I mean, obviously, you know, relationships, you know, you can learn from each other, shared experiences and stuff. So do y'all have any examples of friendships like that right now in your life that you can, that you're leaning on to go through problems and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, we're strange. I mean, pastors are strange, just by definition. You know,
I'm strange.
We're very strange, and pastors' wives are a blessing because of what they have to put up with from all of us strange pastors. And so, you know, I don't want to make it about pastors. You know, it's those of you listening. You know, it's like, who cares? I'm not a pastor. So, where I'm going with this is, it's helpful to have people who at least have some understanding about what some of your challenges look like in life. So yeah, we have some couples in our lives that are also in ministry in different churches and in different places that it's not like we call or text daily, but we always know they're a phone call away.
Check in with
and
them.
They can offer encouragement, guidance, correction, instruction. And so what you're trying to find when you talk about your people are just people who, they don't have to be in the exact same season of life and every little detail of their life match up with yours, but they do have an understanding about some of the challenges you face, and they can offer you some encouragement and some, you know, just counsel from time to time. And really where those friendships show their real value is when you face a crisis.
Yeah.
You know, when you face a crisis, when the diagnosis from the doctor isn't good, you know, when one of your kids walks away from the faith for a season. You know, when you go through those just really tough seasons, you've got those folks to lean back on, you know, bear one another's burdens. And so if you don't have those people in your life, the best place to start is with your church. You know, and it's why we constantly talk about life groups.
Right.
Life groups in and of themselves aren't really, you know, that's not, they're a means to an end. They are the way that you can begin to meet some people who might just be like really good acquaintances that you know at church. They might become really good friends that you have at church. Or you might meet someone who becomes a lifelong friend that really helps you walk with the Lord. But you got to at least take the step, you know, put yourself in that situation.
Yeah, you know, in a life group, you're probably not going to make 10 best friends. But I'm thinking of our friends, John and Julie. We were in a life group with them years ago when we lived in New York City. They're still our friends. Like, we still text, we still chat. we're trying to plan a trip together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's those friends that, you know, you can pick up the phone and pick up where you left off.
The ones you
Yeah,
reach out to when the tough things happen.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to about do it for this episode of the Other Six podcast. First off, Adam and Morgan, on behalf of the church, thank you guys for the interview. Thank you for this past Sunday, and doing
just
this
being
podcast.
honest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
being honest, being
Yeah.
very real. We appreciate you
Yeah.
guys sharing with us. And so we will be back here again next week for our next episode of the Other Six podcast. On behalf of Adam, Morgan, Matt, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.